Sergeant Tom Wilkins drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, staring at the empty stretch of road ahead. Another dull shift. No excitement, no action. His gaze flicked toward the rearview mirror just as a black luxury sedan cruised past. A little too fast, a little too smooth. The driver, a black man in a tailored suit, exuded confidence. Too much confidence. Wilkins smirked. He never liked it when they acted like the law didn't apply to them. "Got one," he muttered, flipping on the lights. The siren wailed through the night as the sedan slowed and pulled over to the shoulder. He approached the vehicle at an unhurried pace, tapping the window with his knuckle. The driver rolled it down, meeting Wilkins' gaze without a hint of nervousness. That irritated him. "License and registration." The man handed over his documents without a word. "Is there a problem, officer?" His voice was calm, measured. "You were speeding," Wilkins said flatly. A lie, but it didn't matter. The driver arched a brow. "I was going 35 and a 40. That tone. Wilkins hated it when they spoke like equals. He glanced inside the car. Spotless. No open bottles, no drugs, no weapons. Damn. He'd expected something. Anything. "Step out of the vehicle." "On what grounds?" "Don't make me use force," Wilkins warned, resting a hand on his cuffs. For a second, the man studied him. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he opened the door and got out, placing his hands on the hood. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Oh, I decide what's a mistake," Wilkins sneered. He yanked the man's arm back and snapped the cuffs on. "And you're under arrest for resisting." The driver didn't struggle, didn't even flinch. But something about his gaze made Wilkins uneasy. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else. Something calculating. "You'll regret this," the man said. Wilkins just laughed. He had no idea how true those words would soon be. Wilkins led the man down the precinct hallway, a smug grin tugging at the corner of his lips. He loved this part, the moment when they realized they were in real trouble. "Take a seat, boss," he said, shoving the man onto a hard metal chair in the interrogation room. The man sat upright, adjusting his cuffs with a quiet patience that irritated Wilkins. He wasn't yelling, wasn't pleading, wasn't even angry, just watching, calculating. "Name?" Wilkins asked, barely looking up as he started filling out the report. "Cameron Davis." Wilkins hesitated. The name sounded familiar, but he brushed it off. Probably just some local businessman who thought his money could get him out of trouble. "You act like you're special," Wilkins scoffed. "Think that fancy suit impresses anyone?" Davis glanced at him, a faint smirk playing at his lips, but said nothing. That silence made Wilkins uneasy. He was used to excuses, to protests, to guys demanding phone calls or threatening lawsuits. But this was different. Rolling his eyes, he walked over to the duty desk, where Officer Grant was entering the detainee's information into the system. Then suddenly Grant stiffened. His fingers froze over the keyboard, his face going pale. "Oh, hell," he muttered under his breath. "What?" Wilkins asked, annoyed. Grant swallowed hard and turned the screen toward him. There, staring back at Wilkins, was an official government photo of Cameron Davis. Beneath it, in bold capital letters, was his title, State Attorney General. A cold knot formed in Wilkins' stomach. "You have any idea what you just did?" Grant whispered. Wilkins's throat felt tight. "That man oversees every police officer in this state," Grant continued. "He fights corruption. He investigates abuse of power, and you just put handcuffs on him over a fake charge." Wilkins could barely breathe. His pulse hammered in his ears. Maybe Davis wouldn't make a big deal out of it. Maybe. "Look outside," Grant muttered. Wilkins turned toward the window and felt his stomach drop. Journalists. Dozens of them. News vans, cameras, microphones, all swarming the entrance of the precinct like vultures. Then the door to the interrogation room swung open. Davis walked out, flanked by the precinct lieutenant and the police chief. "Sergeant Wilkins," Davis said smoothly, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made Wilkins' skin crawl. "I suggest you find a good lawyer." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card and placed it on the desk beside Wilkins, tapping it twice with his finger. Then leaning in just slightly, he added, "And I will absolutely be attending your hearing." Wilkins couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He just stood there watching as the man he had so recklessly arrested walked out the front doors, into a storm of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. In that moment, Wilkins knew his career was over. If you're still watching, drop a like now. The courtroom buzzed like a beehive, packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators, whispering in hushed tones. No one could believe it. A low-ranking officer arresting the state attorney general. It was the scandal of the year. At the defense table, Sergeant Tom Wilkins sat rigid, his face flushed with tension. His lawyer had told him this was just a formality, a way to smooth things over. But deep down, he knew something was off. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and Cameron Davis stepped inside. Impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, he moved with an air of quiet authority, as if he owned the room. Wilkins clenched his fists under the table as Davis walked past without even sparing him a glance. The judge took her seat. Court is now in session. Davis rose from the prosecution's table. Your Honor, I request that this hearing be made fully public and transparent. The people have a right to see how the system works. The judge nodded. Proceed. A large screen flickered on at the front of the courtroom. The dash cam footage of the arrest played for all to see. Wilkins watched in horror as his own words filled the silent room. You were speeding. I was going 35 and a 40. Step out of the vehicle. On what grounds? Don't make me use force. Then came the moment that sealed his fate. Wilkins twisting Davis's arm, slapping the cuffs on, and smugly declaring, You're under arrest for resisting. The courtroom murmured, journalists scribbled furiously, and even the judge's brow furrowed. Davis turned to face him. Sergeant Wilkins, you claimed I resisted arrest. Do you see any resistance in this footage? Wilkins' mouth felt dry. Well, not exactly. Davis took a slow step closer. So you fabricated the charges? Wilkins panicked. I was just doing my job. The judge banged the gavel. Order in the court. Davis kept his voice steady, controlled. The truth is, Sergeant, you are a product of a system that has shielded police misconduct for years. But today, this courtroom isn't just deciding your fate. It's deciding the fate of many who have suffered at the hands of injustice. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some nodded, others whispered among themselves. The air felt different now. It wasn't just about Wilkins anymore. It was about every cop who had ever gotten away with abuse. Wilkins gritted his teeth. He wanted to argue, to fight back. But what could he say? An hour later, the judge delivered the ruling. Officer Tom Wilkins, you are hereby suspended from duty, and a criminal case for abuse of power is officially opened against you. Wilkins felt the ground disappear beneath him. Davis stood, buttoning his jacket, already turning to leave. He never looked back. The scandal was only beginning. The scandal exploded overnight. News anchors dissected every second of the footage. Social media erupted with outrage. Racist cop arrests the attorney general on false charges. Sergeant Wilkins thought he was above the law until the law fought back. Abuse of power caught on tape. Will justice be served? Wilkins sat in his dimly lit apartment, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, staring at the TV as his own face flashed across the screen. This case raises serious questions about police accountability, the anchor said. Sergeant Wilkins has been placed on indefinite suspension pending further investigation. He cursed under his breath, rubbing his temples. He thought the system would protect him. It always had before. The next morning, he pulled into the precinct parking lot. His badge, his damn badge, refused to unlock the door. He tried again. Nothing. Tom, a voice called. Officer Grant stood at the front desk, avoiding eye contact. You're suspended, he said quietly. Orders from above. Wilkins clenched his jaw. You know this is all politics. Grant sighed. Doesn't matter. They want you at headquarters. Wilkins exhaled sharply and drove to the main office, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Inside, the police commissioner sat flanked by lawyers, files stacked neatly in front of them. Sergeant Wilkins, you're under internal investigation. Wilkins forced a smirk. Because of that damn attorney general? The commissioner shook his head. Not just that. We reviewed your past cases, complaints, violations, video evidence. You drew too much attention, Tom. We can't ignore it anymore. Wilkins scoffed. So that's it? You're throwing me away like garbage? The commissioner leaned forward. You're toxic now. The department needs a new image. Wilkins felt his world crumbling. For 20 years, he was the system. Now the system had no use for him. The real punishment hadn't even started yet. A week later, the charges became official. Excessive force, false reports, systematic discrimination. Wilkins sat across from his lawyer in a sterile conference room, the overhead light harsh and unforgiving. A file lay open between them, filled with complaints he thought had been buried. The lawyer exhaled. Tom, this is serious. They're offering a deal. Plead guilty, take probation, and you'll avoid jail time. But your badge, it's gone for good. Wilkins shook his head. I won't plead guilty. The lawyer slid a phone across the table. Wilkins pressed play. His own voice filled the room. They're always hiding something. Keep them scared. His stomach twisted. This is a setup. No, Tom, just consequences. The trial was public. Cameras lined the back of the courtroom. Every major network carried the feed live. The nation watched as the judge entered, the courtroom falling silent. Daniel Thomas Wilkins, she announced, her voice firm. The court finds you guilty on all counts. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped, others clapped. Wilkins sat stiff, jaw tight, refusing to look at the cameras. You are hereby barred from law enforcement and sentenced to 3 years of probation, the judge continued. It was over. As the courtroom emptied, Wilkins lingered, staring at the polished wood of the defense table. He had lost everything. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. Cameron Davis stood there watching him. No anger, no triumph. Just cold, quiet satisfaction. Wilkins' voice was hoarse. Happy now? Davis adjusted his cuffs. Justice has prevailed, Sergeant. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The system didn't break you, Wilkins. It just doesn't work for you anymore. Then he was gone. Outside, the crowd cheered. Reporters scrambled for sound bites. Wilkins didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the empty chair across from him. For 20 years, he thought the system had his back. Turns out it was just waiting for the right time to cut him loose. Justice doesn't always come swiftly, but when it does, it changes everything. What do you think? Was this karma, or just another case of corruption being exposed? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more gripping stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one.